communication and study skills. Part 1 of this course will cover understanding of communication. The following are the objectives of this part. You should be able to define communication, and be able also to describe elements of communication, describe channels of communication, but also you should be able to explain the importance of communication, as well as be able to describe and illustrate the entire process of communication, and also the different forms or categories of communication. Okay, now the question to you is, what is communication? What is communication? Communication, basically, it is the process that allows us to interact with other people. But now, why do we have to interact? Why do we have to interact? To interact amongst ourselves. And do you think without communication can we be able to survive in the world? That's a question to take home with you as well, as we go along in this course. So basically, communication is about sharing, and when we refer to this particular communication, it's a human communication. But we are referring to communication that involves people, that involves sharing of knowledge, experiences, values, attitude, and whatever you want to call it. But the issue is about interacting and sharing these experiences amongst ourselves. And so that's why we have different forms of communication, and sometimes I call them categories of communication, which includes speaking, writing, gestures, touch, and broadcasting, etc. And as we go along across this course, you will notice that we've got variety of forms of communication. So, for us to be able to communicate, communication is just something that is there, and sometimes we cannot even notice that there is communication because we are used to talk to each other since we are born. But when we come to this course, we learn that actually communication is a systematic process. It is the process that it must involve core elements in order to ensure that communication takes place effectively. Now, the question that we should take it with from this lecture is: now, why do we fight if we are there to these particular elements of communication? Why do we end up into conflict? For example, when you're calling your friend and you don't understand each other over the phone, why do we end up into confusion and misunderstanding? So, in the next slide, we're going to learn on these different elements that we need to take into account when we communicate. I think human communication is similar to animal communication. And then you might be wondering that can animals communicate as well? Yes, maybe. That's a question also to take home with. So I want you to be able, at the end of this course, that you are able to distinguish between human communication and animal communication, and that you should be able to learn that human communication is distinctive and different from that animal communication. Now, from my previous discussion with you, we ended on the key elements that we need to take into account to ensure that communication is effective. So for us, for communication to be effective, we need to have some things or some people involved, and we call those people as participants in communication. That these are people that are involved in the communication process, and they are referred as communicators or interlocutors. Interlocutors. So these are the people that interact among themselves. We have the sender, and then we have the receiver of the message. For example, you get the scenario of this lecture now. Think yourself of who can be the sender in this lecture and who can be the receiver in this lecture. So in any kind of communication, it doesn't matter what kind of communication we're going to see later in the lecture, that we have different forms and with different types of communication. It doesn't matter. We must have participants in human communication. I don't know, how about animals? Do they have also participants? We're going to see later on. But also, the fact that it is a process, it involves decoding. Decoding is we encode and make the message and decode the message. So the fact that there is involvement of the receiver and the sender. The sender decode the message, and then the receiver encode the message. Decode the message by interpretation of the meaning of that particular message that was sent to the receiver. And so it is an internal process in a human brain. It's not the process that you can see physically and be able to tell that now the process of encoding and decoding has taken place. But what is important to you is that there should be someone who is creating or making that particular message. And then at the same time, there should be someone who will receive that particular message. In any form, any kind of communication. But also, why are we communicating? We're communicating because there is a purpose. There should be the message. What do you want to communicate? It doesn't matter how do you want it to communicate, what form do you want to use for that particular communication, and we have to have a message or a purpose for you to communicate. And we've got a variety of forms of communication which involve verbal communication. We're going to see what it is verbal communication, non-verbal communication, or written communication. And these are also forms of communication that you will be engaged in during your lifetime at the university. So it's very important that you are able to distinguish when we speak about verbal communication, or when we refer to message that is being communicated verbally, or the message that is being communicated through written form, or the message that is being communicated through non-verbal communication. You will be asking yourself now, how can the people with speech impairment, for example, how do they communicate? It's the form of communication as well that we also need to take into account. And that's why we are able to understand each other regardless of our physical differences, but we are able to communicate from one human being to another. And so the message refers to the ideas, the data, the feeling that the sender intends to share with others. So something that you intend to communicate. The purpose for me to stand here today to communicate about this particular program or about this particular point. Okay, that's the purpose for me to be able to communicate or to discuss with the students. The purpose, the message. But also, how do we communicate? How is this message being transformed from one person to another? We've got medium and channel. So medium is the physical means through which the message is transmitted. So it can be through the voice, or it can be through the body movement, as I said. So this is the physical means through which the message is communicated. When we use the projection, when we project your lecture notes, for example, what kind of medium is that? Okay. When you use the laptop, when you access your Moodle on your screen, for example, what kind of medium is that? Something physical, something tangible, that message can be communicated. When you watch the news through the television, when you listen to the news through the radio, what kind of medium is that? That anything that is facilitating and helping us them to be able to transform the message from one angle to the other. Okay? But also we have the channel. The channel is the route by which the message travels. Okay, how the message travels through from one person to another. Okay, do we get the messages through the voice, or we get the messages by watching or looking? So this is the channel, the route through which the message is communicated from one angle to the other. And with all those kind of this element, this very important element for to ensure effective communication, they should be the meaning of communication. They should be the reason why you decided to communicate, why have you decided to write a letter to your sister, why have you decided to write a message, a text to your daddy, to your mommy. They should be something that you want to communicate, apart from the purpose, but also what you want to communicate. That's what you call the meaning of that particular communication. And so we've got so many different events of communication. It depends on the context, in the setting in which you find yourself, and the participants, the people that you find yourself, and the activity that that particular group is engaged in influence the process, the entire process of communication. So, and within the element of effective communication, we have an aspect of noise. We have an aspect of noise. If you look at this communication cycle, you will notice that we have these key elements, or you can call them core or important elements that must be in the communication process to ensure that communication is effective. And when we try to understand this communication, we notice that this communication cannot take place if it's not placed in a particular context. And we find that there is this factor called noise. Noise is just any stimuli that hinder the sending and receiving of the message, so that the intended meaning is not understood. So we find that communication is being very much disrupted by noise. Now this noise, it can be what we call the external noise, or the internal noise, or the semantic noise, or whatever noise you want to call it. And at the end of the day, we find that our communication process can be disrupted or affected negatively. So with the external noise, this is a noise that when, for example, we are in the lecture and then we can hear the noise outside the venue, or we have disruptive students in class dropping their pens, switching on their loud music on their laptops, or picking up the phone when the lecture is when madam is busy with the lecture. So that is the external noise, and everybody can be disrupted if they are not very much focused. Or any kind of noise that we hear outside, people sleeping or talking outside of the lecture venue. So that is the external noise. Now when it comes to the internal noise, this is within the person. It's not the noise that a different person can notice that this person is being distracted this morning. So the noise that is within in your mind, your psychological is being affected for the day. That is the internal noise. It is within yourself. When you're talking to yourself, for example, when you're supposed to be in church listening to the pastor, instead of focusing to what the pastor is preaching, you might be outside of the church. You're thinking about the food that you left in at home, or you're thinking about your issues, your problem, or you're thinking that, oh, the pastor is taking my time. So that is psychological or the internal noise. We call it psychological or internal noise. As a result, at the end of the day, when the pastor finishes the preaching, then when the pastor tries to establish if you were listening to what he is preaching, then everybody is quiet in church. He doesn't want to talk about anything because you were not in church actually, you were outside. Psychologically, your mind was not in. So the same applies to the lecture room when we're giving the lecture and any of the students might have the psychological or the internal noise. As a result, at the end of the lecture, I'm asking question, what is communication skills, the student? And no one is responding. What does that mean? That when I was talking about the issues of communication, effective element of communication, the process of communication, the difference between human and animal communication, these students actually were not in class. Psychologically, they were there physically and mentally they were outside, and that's what we call external, the internal noise or the psychological noise. And also we have another noise as far as communication is concerned, is called the semantic noise. This is a result of encountering difficult words, vocabulary, and struggle to understand the sentences and words that are used in a particular text, or when you're communicating with your friend and you find that the sentences, the choice of words that your friend uses is very difficult for you to interpret and understand, and that is semantic noise. So at your university level, you will encounter so many times the semantic noise in your courses, in your content courses. You will encounter the semantic noise, and you will have to struggle and be acquainted with those terminologies that are used in your field. So if you are a legal student, then you will have to learn those terminologies that are normally used in your field. Science students, you will have to do the same to struggle and be able to understand and be acquainted with those terminologies that are used in your field, so that you reduce the level of semantic noise and then you are able to cope and be able to understand your lectures as you go along in your studies. And so, as we conclude this part, I can stress that any kind of communication must have feedback, and also part an element of effective communication. So we communicate so that we are able to get feedback. Interaction, I say the interlocutors, that we interact among ourselves. People interact among themselves, or they communicate among themselves because they have to give and receive feedback. So the feedback doesn't necessarily depend on the sender or the receiver. They can both give feedback. They can change the identity in the communication. The receiver can give feedback, but also the sender can also give feedback, and the identity can change from being the sender to a receiver, and the receiver being the sender of the message. But what is important that I need to stress in this lecture is that context in any kind of communication is very, very important. That context is the environment, the place, the condition in which the communication takes place. So the context, this is the lecture. The context, this is the lecture room. The environment, the surroundings, the setting of the area is very much important and influential in the communication process. What is climatic condition of the day, what is happening around everybody in the venue, what is the weather for the day, is it very hot, is it too cold, it has influence in the communication. That's why when you communicate using your cell phone, it's very important to notice sometimes the person that you are calling might be in the situation that is not conducive for that particular moment to communicate with you. And that's why you must try to establish if that person is ready to communicate with you at that particular point in time, or that person might have to wait for you so that they get the convenient environment, the context, so that you communicate and be able to understand each other. Because remember, the purpose of communication is to be able to understand and make meaning from that particular communicative event. And there are varieties of communicative events. Whether you are in your bedroom, it is a communicative event. So long as you want to make communication, you want to communicate with a different person, whether you're in your study room, whether in your visiting your friends, or you at the market, any kind of communicative event must involve this kind of element. So we've got an activity here of which I think you can take your time and revise, and they will help you to actually do some kind of recap of what we discussed in this particular lecture. Now, let's look at different forms of communication. As we discussed earlier, we said that there are different forms of communication. We said we can communicate by speaking or by writing, or we can communicate non-verbally. And so now let's look at these different forms of communication and see how we use them in our daily life. Because remember, communication is practical and communication is part and parcel of our life. And actually, I love that particular question in your testing, which I asked that communication is part and parcel of our life. Discuss. Don't you find that a very good question for you to respond? I expect you now that after this particular lecture, you are able to respond to that particular question very well and be able to gain some marks. So the forms of communication includes the verbal communication. The verbal communication is the communication that involves words, okay? Whether the word is a spoken word or it is a written word. And this form of communication include the written and the oral communication. That's the verbal communication. So you shouldn't be confused when we refer to written communication, when we refer to the notes that you are taking in this lecture, the summary that you are taking, you are jotting down, okay? When we refer to when you're writing a letter, when we refer to essay writing, and all kind of writing activities that you will be engaged in when you are at the university, that is part of verbal communication. But also, we do a lot of oral communication. Like now, what I'm doing now, it is the oral communication. Communication using words verbally with my mouth. Okay, so you do a lot chatting with your friend, speaking, talking to people. We do a lot of oral communication. So oral communication is also part of verbal communication. It is the communication that involves mouth and it involves words, or in other words, it involves language. Okay, so language, it can be written or it can be spoken. And so we also have the non-verbal communication. This non-verbal communication, we also do a lot of it when we involve the postures. You know, like I'm doing now, I'm trying to explain to you so that you are able to understand. When we do the gestures, we say goodbye to our friends, you know, when we show any kind of signs. But also, this is very important for form of communication, for for other people with any kind of physical impairment, especially as far as speech and other impairments is concerned, they very much use the non-verbal communication. And as a result, we have even sign language attached to that as the form of communication that does not involve any kind of word. Rather, it involves action, postures, gestures, and this form of communication was very much used by ancestors. The non-verbal communication was very much used by our ancestors, because remember, they never have any written word, any official language that they used for their communication. And the level of education was not that much higher for them to be able to use the advanced technology of a printed word. So how did they communicate? This is also another very interesting question. How did the ancestors communicated amongst themselves? They could not read or write. They did not know anything about the word. So they communicated through oral communication, a lot of talking, storytelling, but also they used the whistles and drum to communicate different events that were happening in the surrounding, in the community. When there is a funeral, there is a particular sound that could be communicated to people to indicate that there is a particular issue that is happening in the village at that particular time. But also the dressing code, okay? The chief's wife was dressed different from the other wives, during the ceremony in the village. So that also communicated the hairstyling, the colors that will be used for that particular day could communicate that there is ceremony in the village, or there is something that is happening or happened in the village. So that is the non-verbal communication, and we continue to use the non-verbal communication very extensively even in our daily life. We use even non-verbal communication within the lecture when we don't want the madam to hear what we're talking amongst ourselves, but we can still communicate to borrow the pen, to borrow something, or to borrow the cell phone to text your parents and whatsoever when you are seated in your lecture room. And at the end of the day, communication still takes place effectively, and the same process of the elements of communication are also observed in the same communicative events. And so the last form of communication is the visual communication. The visual communication is a communication that to navigate and understand the world. It is a communication that we visualize, like when we are reading notes, or we are accessing our Moodle platform through our cell phone, through our laptops, through our whatsoever facility that we have, and that is visual communication. When we're traveling at the airport, we find different posters, we find the timing on the boards. That is the visual communication. And the communication that I didn't even mention here that we encounter every day, it is the audio-visual communication that you hear at the same time you are able to visualize when you're watching the television. That is another form of communication, audio-visual communication. You can get the message by hearing, but also get the message by visualizing and seeing the pictures and also reading through the screen and so forth. So these are the issues that you need to be exposed to and make some effort and see how can you realize these different forms that we covered in this particular lecture in your day-to-day activities, but also you should be able to distinguish them on how we use them differently, as sometimes we use them interchangeably, that we cannot separate them at all and create some boundary. So I give some activity for you that you can review later with your peers in your group discussion. I believe you do the group discussion, and so you can see on different expressions that you can come out with as far as these different forms of communication that we covered in this particular course. Okay, now in our next lecture, we'll cover and look at the different types of communication and the communication models that underpins the meanings of communication and so forth.